What if everything you thought was true was a lie? A respected teacher accused by two students, a courtroom full of secrets, and a jaw-dropping twist that turns the entire town upside down. But the biggest betrayal? It was never in the trial. It was in the plan no one saw coming. If you're new to the channel, then please subscribe, like the video, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Make sure to watch this video till the end, because in the final moments, you'll see the journey from an entirely new perspective. Now let's jump into the story. Greenshore was the kind of small town where everyone knew everyone, and everyone had an opinion. Tucked along Oregon's rocky coastline, the town was known for its crashing waves, quiet charm, and one man who always seemed to stand out. Professor Graham Ellison. To his students at Greenshore Community College, Mr. Ellison wasn't just a psychology teacher. He was the psychology teacher. His lectures were never dull, his smile was easy, and he had a way of making every student feel heard. Whether he was talking about childhood behavior or how the human brain responds to guilt, students hung on to every word like it was gospel, especially Linda Harper. Linda was 17, beautiful, and very aware of both. The daughter of Greenshore's wealthiest family, she wore designer jackets like they were hoodies and walked the halls like she owned them, because in some ways she did. Most students admired her, some feared her, others just stayed out of her way. But her sights were firmly set on Mr. Ellison. She liked the way he dressed, calm, clean, no nonsense. She liked the way he spoke, confident but not arrogant. And she liked how, even though half the girls in class were clearly obsessed with him, he never crossed a line. That only made her want him more. One warm spring morning, Professor Ellison stood in front of his class discussing a new topic, crimes against personal boundaries. It was part of a unit on psychology and law. To make things more engaging, he invited two guests, Officer Jules Brock and Detective Celine Ford from the Greenshore Police Department. Crimes of this nature, said Detective Ford, pacing the front of the lecture hall, aren't just about violence. They're about control, violation, taking away someone's choice. Most of the students listened quietly. A few smirked. Linda sat upright, her eyes bouncing between Ellison and the detective, but one student wasn't having it. Mira Dalton. She sat near the back, wearing black from head to toe, chewing on a pen like it owed her money. When Ellison gave her the chance to speak, she didn't hesitate. "I'm sick of hearing you talk, like this place is some bubble of safety," she snapped. "Greenshore's just like anywhere else. People lie. People do whatever they want, including you, Mr. Ellison." A wave of silence followed her words. Without another word, Mira grabbed her backpack and stormed out of the room. The door slammed behind her. Ellison frowned slightly but didn't comment. Officer Brock leaned in and muttered, "I know that girl. Been in and out of our office since she was 15. The lecture continued, but the mood had shifted. Students now whispered, laughed nervously, joked about who in town had crossed what line. But Ellison, ever composed, thanked the officers once the class ended. Later that afternoon, he sat under the sun at the marina, preparing the sailboats for club practice. His sailing club was free to join, though not everyone could afford the equipment. One of his students, Jimmy Lowry, a quiet boy with old shoes and a big heart, cleaned Ellison's Jeep in exchange for lessons. As Jimmy scrubbed the front bumper, Linda and her best friend Tessa pulled up. "Need an extra hand?" Linda asked, tossing her hair. "Or two." Tessa giggled and pulled out a sponge. Ellison raised an eyebrow. "It's not a party," he said, half joking. Linda leaned in a little too close. "Just want to be helpful, sir." Ellison stayed polite but distant. He appreciated kindness. He didn't appreciate flirtation. As the girls sprayed each other with water and created a bubble-filled scene that could have been from a music video, Ellison kept his focus on the boats. Eventually, the Jeep sparkled, and Linda stepped forward, with a grin. "Payment, please." "For what?" Ellison asked. "Coupons, sailing club." Ellison chuckled and walked inside to grab them. But by the time he came back, Tessa had left, and Linda was no longer outside. He found her standing in his living room. "I just wanted to say thank you," she whispered, stepping closer. "Linda," he said firmly, "this isn't appropriate. You need to leave." The look on her face changed. Her smile vanished. She turned, stormed out, and slammed the door behind her. That evening, Ellison got a call from Natalie Harper, Linda's mother. She was polite but clearly anxious. "Graham, did you see Linda today? She didn't show up for class." Ellison hesitated. "I saw her earlier. Nothing unusual." Through the phone, he could hear shouting. Natalie sighed. "She's going through something. Still misses her father." "Understandable," Ellison replied, trying to stay calm. Just then he heard Natalie gasp. "Linda," she shouted, "what are you doing with that rifle?" The line went dead. Ellison stared at his phone, feeling the first stirrings of trouble. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. In Greenshore, secrets rarely stayed buried, and sometimes they came back with claws. The morning after the strange phone call with Natalie Harper, Professor Graham Ellison tried to convince himself that everything was fine. But deep down, he knew something was coming. And it wouldn't be good. His instincts were right. By noon, a dark blue police cruiser pulled into the college parking lot. Students whispered and watched from behind lockers as Detective Celine Ford and Officer Jules Brock walked through the campus like storm clouds in uniform. They entered Ellison's lecture hall just as his second class was starting. "Professor Ellison," Celine said calmly, "we'd like a word with you, privately." He followed them into an empty office. The door shut softly behind him. "What's this about?" he asked, trying to stay composed. "It's about Linda Harper," Celine replied. "Her mother filed a formal complaint last night. Linda claims that you acted inappropriately toward her, and that you crossed a serious boundary." Ellison stared at her, stunned. "That's not true. We're not here to make assumptions," she added. "We're here to investigate. But until we finish, the college is asking you to take a temporary leave, effective immediately." Everything moved fast after that. In less than 24 hours, Professor Graham Ellison went from one of the most admired people in Greenshore to someone whose name was whispered with suspicion. News spread like wildfire. Some students cried out in disbelief. Others said, "I knew it. He was too perfect." Linda didn't come back to school, but that only added to the drama. Online forums buzzed with rumors. Even the teachers at the college seemed unsure of what to believe. Ellison kept quiet. His lawyer, Malcolm Reese, was the only person he trusted. Malcolm wasn't what most people expected in a lawyer. He wore old shoes, mismatched socks, and talked like he'd rather be fishing. But he was sharp enough to smell something fishy from the start. "I've seen cases like this before," Malcolm told Ellison over a lukewarm cup of gas station coffee. "She's rich, she's young, and she's angry. And when you mix those three things, you get a storm." "But I never did anything," Ellison said quietly. "I rejected her, that's all." "Exactly," Malcolm nodded. "That's motive." But things weren't about to calm down. Days later, just when the investigation seemed to be slowing, Mira Dalton walked into the police station. She didn't come with a lawyer. She didn't even call ahead. She simply walked in and said she had something to say. Sitting across from Officer Brock, Mira folded her arms and looked at the recorder, blinking red. "I want to report something," she said. "It happened last summer, with Mr. Ellison." The room fell silent. She continued, her voice low and tense. "He gave me a ride home. But he didn't take me home. He stopped somewhere else, and I didn't want what happened next. Just like that, everything changed again. The police had 2 accusations, 2 girls, 2 separate stories. But strangely, the details were eerily similar. Almost too similar. When the news hit the town, the mood turned from uncertain to furious. Protests started outside the college. People who had once praised Ellison now wanted him arrested. His picture was torn down from the faculty wall. The sailing club shut down. Parents pulled their kids from his classes. Even his neighbors stopped saying hello. Through it all, Ellison held on to one thing: his innocence. But it was hard to hold on to hope when the world wanted you guilty. He spent his days in a quiet corner of his house, watching the sea through the window. Sometimes he wondered if he should have left town the moment it started, but running would have made him look guilty. He wasn't guilty, and someone needed to believe that. Malcolm did. "This Mira girl?" Malcolm said during one meeting, flipping through a thick folder. "You defended her once, didn't you?" "Yes. She was going to be expelled for vandalism. I convinced the board to give her a second chance." Malcolm scratched his chin. "And she called you when she got arrested again?" "Yeah," Ellison replied. "But I was out of town. I never picked up." Malcolm leaned back, smiling slowly. Well, that's something." Meanwhile, Linda Harper stayed hidden behind the gates of her family estate. Reporters camped outside. Her mother, Natalie, appeared on local news vowing justice. "He'll pay for what he did," she said coldly. "My daughter is not a liar." But in the shadows, behind closed doors, not everyone was so sure. Some of Linda's classmates remembered how obsessed she had been with Professor Ellison. Some remembered the way she'd talk about him like he was hers. Still, suspicion wasn't enough to stop the law. And when Mira's official statement was added to the file, the police made their move. Professor Graham Ellison was arrested. No bail. No goodbye. He sat alone in a holding cell, staring at the wall. "You okay?" Malcolm asked through the bars. "I don't know," Ellison replied. "They all think I'm someone I'm not." Malcolm gave a half smile. "Then we're going to have to remind them who you really are." Outside, the wind picked up across the water. Clouds gathered above the town of Greenshore. A storm was coming, and it was far from over. The courthouse in Greenshore was small, old, and usually quiet. But today, it was packed. Reporters waited. Outside, locals filled every seat inside. People who had never cared about courtroom procedures were suddenly glued to every word. Everyone wanted to know, was Professor Graham Ellison guilty? He sat beside his lawyer, Malcolm Reese, dressed in a plain gray suit. His eyes were tired, but he kept his back straight. This was his chance to finally be heard. The judge entered. The jury was called in. The trial began. The prosecution went. First, they brought out Linda Harper. She wore a soft pink dress and clutched a tissue in one hand. She looked fragile, innocent. Her voice shook as she answered each question. "He told me I was special," she said, tears in her eyes. "He gave me extra attention. I thought it meant something, but one day he changed. He made me feel trapped." The courtroom was silent. Some people in the crowd wiped away tears. Then came Mira Dalton. Unlike Linda, she walked in wearing dark jeans and a stiff posture. Her words were shorter, colder. But the story she told sounded almost exactly like Linda's. "He offered me a ride. Then things happened that I didn't agree to," she said. Graham sat still, his hands clasped together. Malcolm leaned over and whispered, "Now it's our turn." When it was time for the defense, Malcolm stood and smiled at the jury. "Let's take a step back," he said. "Let's talk about motives. Let's talk about what people do when they feel hurt, rejected, or ignored." He started with Mira. "You were nearly expelled from Greenshore College last year, correct?" "Yes," Mira replied. "And who stood up for you in that meeting?" There was a pause. "Mr. Ellison," she admitted. Malcolm nodded. "Then earlier this year you were arrested again. Who did you call for help?" Again, a pause. "Mr. Ellison." "But according to your story, that's the man who hurt you." Mira shifted in her seat. "Would you call someone like that again?" Malcolm asked the jury. "Someone who harmed you? Or would you avoid them?" The courtroom buzzed. The judge called for quiet. Malcolm turned back to Mira. "Last time you were arrested, Mr. Ellison didn't answer, did he?" "No," she whispered. "Did that make you angry?" She didn't answer. "And who did you speak to after that arrest?" Mira's fingers twisted the edge of her sleeve. "Linda." "Thank you," Malcolm said softly. He let the moment sit. Then he turned to the jury. "Now, I'm not saying these young women aren't struggling, but are they telling the truth? Or is this a story built on rejection, jealousy, and a shared grudge?" The final day of the trial came fast. Everyone could feel the tension in the air. The judge called the courtroom to order. Malcolm rose one last time. "I ask you to look at the facts, not the tears, not the whispers, the facts." But no one expected what came next. Mira stood up. "I need to say something," she said. The judge allowed it. "I lied," she said. The room gasped. "I didn't want to," she continued, trembling. "But I felt pressured. I felt like if I didn't stand with Linda, I'd be left alone. And I was angry. I thought he abandoned me when I needed help, but he never hurt me." She looked straight at Linda. "I'm sorry." Linda's face turned red. "You liar!" she shouted, throwing her water glass toward Mira. The bailiff quickly pulled her back as gasps echoed through the room. That outburst changed everything. When the jury returned later that day, their verdict was clear. "Not guilty," the foreman said. Graham let out a breath he'd been holding for weeks. Malcolm smiled for the first time in days. Outside the courthouse, the reporters rushed toward them, but Graham didn't stop to speak. He simply walked away, his steps heavy, his heart still confused. Freedom didn't erase the pain. He had lost his job. His reputation was bruised. The college made it clear he wouldn't be welcome back. Parents were still angry. Some students avoided him on the street, but something was coming that no one expected. That evening, Malcolm arrived at Graham's house with a large envelope. "What's this?" Graham asked. "An offer," Malcolm said, grinning. "The Harpers don't want you filing a lawsuit. It would drag everything back into the spotlight, so they're willing to settle. Quietly." Inside the envelope was a check, a big one. Graham stared at it, unsure. "They're not giving you this because they're kind," Malcolm said. "They're giving it to you because you won." Graham took a deep breath. The nightmare seemed to be over, but he didn't know it. Yet, this story wasn't finished. Far from it. Because somewhere behind another closed door, another plan was already in motion. And this time, masks would fall completely. Weeks passed since the courtroom drama ended. The town of Greenshore had moved on, or at least tried to. The reporters left, the gossip slowed, and people returned to their normal lives. But for Graham Ellison, normal was gone forever. He no longer taught at the college. He didn't run the sailing club. His quiet home, once filled with books and laughter, now felt like a shell. Still, he told himself he had made it through the worst. The storm had passed, or so he thought. One warm evening, Graham checked into a beachside motel under a false name. He wore sunglasses and a baseball cap, blending into the crowd. Inside the room, he placed his bag on the bed and turned toward the bathroom. That's when he heard the door click open. A familiar voice spoke. "I knew you'd show up." Linda Harper stood in the doorway, her hair tied back, wearing a sundress and holding a bottle of champagne. Graham didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled. "Took you long enough." She laughed and walked in like she owned the place. Moments later, another knock. This time it was Mira, but she didn't look like herself. Her hair was dyed, her clothes were new, and she wore contact lenses that changed her eye color. The three sat around the small motel table, passing the bottle back and forth like old friends. They didn't look like victims or enemies. They looked like co-conspirators, because that's exactly what they were. The courtroom, the tears, the lies, all of it had been carefully planned. From the first flirtation to the courtroom confession. The goal wasn't revenge, it was money, and they got it. $9 million from the Harper family, quietly paid to avoid a lawsuit that would drag their name through the mud. That check had been split 3 ways, hidden through layers of accounts. Graham had even purchased land in South America and made a down payment on a yacht. But something had changed. Trust had started to crack. We can't be seen together anymore, Graham said, his voice firm. If anyone catches on, we're all done, understand? Mira leaned back. Relax, we pulled it off, it's over. No, Graham said. It's not over, not until I say it is. Linda crossed her arms. What's that supposed to mean? Graham didn't answer. He just poured himself another drink and stared out the window. But someone else was watching. Someone they hadn't counted on. Detective Celine Ford had followed Linda from the Harper estate. She had grown suspicious when Mira suddenly disappeared after the trial. Even more suspicious when she saw Linda using an old phone in a town she no longer lived in. From a nearby rooftop, Celine snapped photos. 3 people. 1 motel room. All connected to a case that was supposedly closed. She wasn't the only one watching. A few days later, Mira received an unexpected visit from a man in a faded trench coat. It was Officer Jules Brock, no longer in uniform, now working private security. But he hadn't forgotten a single detail of the case. He handed her a file, pictures, financial documents, surveillance reports. Then he spoke calmly. You're being watched. You're not as invisible as you think. Mira tried to act calm, but fear flickered in her eyes. Back in town, Celine questioned Graham directly. He laughed in her face. You really think there's still a case here? He asked. She didn't answer. She only looked at him and said, Guilt has a way of catching up, even when the law doesn't. That night, Mira received a strange voicemail from Graham. His voice was low, serious. If we don't do something soon, she'll find out everything. Maybe it's time to fix this. For good. Mira froze. Was he talking about Celine? Or was he talking about her? She tried to call Linda. No answer. She drove straight to Linda's lake house, heart racing. Linda was calm, almost too calm. You said we'd all be equal. Mira snapped. But now you're disappearing, and I think Graham is planning something. Linda laughed. We were never equal, Mira, you just didn't see it. What neither of them knew was that Celine had placed a tracker under Graham's car. And that very night, she followed him to a private dock where his new yacht waited in the water. Graham was alone. Or so he thought. As he stepped aboard, a voice stopped him. You never planned to share it, did you? It was Mira. He turned, startled. You shouldn't be here. You wanted me gone, she said, just like you wanted to get rid of Linda. Before he could speak, Mira raised a syringe. In seconds, Graham collapsed, gasping for air. Celine arrived too late to stop what had happened, but she caught a glimpse of Mira sailing into the night alone. The next day, news broke that Graham Ellison was found dead aboard his own yacht. The cause? Poisoning. Linda had vanished. No one knew where she went. Celine opened the case once again. But Mira? Mira was already gone. She had changed her name, her look, her entire life. Everyone believed she had vanished after the trial. No one ever imagined she was the one pulling the strings all along. In a quiet cafe in a distant city, Mira sipped coffee and opened a letter from a lawyer. Inside, confirmation that her share of the money had cleared. She smiled to herself. The perfect plan, the perfect ending, or so she believed. Because somewhere, far away, Linda watched the news too, and she was smiling too. This game wasn't over. It had just begun.